Again, as we were downstairs, I was mentioning to those who we were coughing with that I'm kind of in a frustrating phase at the moment. I got these new glasses. They're a new prescription. And my prescription is for out there. So like right now, I can see everything sort of crystal clear. I can even read what's on the bulletin board. Okay, not quite that good. Not quite that good. But the struggle is that now, I can't see anything in front of me. And whereas with my old glasses, I could actually follow my notes and read the music, or well, the words anyway, not the music. I don't read music notes, that's Braille to me. But and so then I'm having to do this. And then what that does is now you're all blurry. And so for those who kind of nod off, I can't even tell anymore. And yeah, you're still with me. And so anyway, it's kind of funny. These are on my forehead more than they're on my eyes now, it seems like. But yeah, but as I was mentioning too, it just seems that so much has transpired in this past week. And it feels like the 22nd was so long ago, but it was just a week ago. And throughout this past week, I've been trying to connect up with through email or social media with some old friends just to wish them a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year too. And Garth Friesen, I don't know how many of you remember Garth Friesen. He's Henry and Lydia's boy. It's funny to talk like that, but he is. Thornview Friesen's. Steve Friesen's younger brother, and he is among them. Garth and I have a long-standing history. We were high school friends from when they had moved from northern Manitoba to Morden here, and we were college friends. And we were even northern BCers too, BC friends. They were, Garth and his wife Monica were in northwestern BC, in Terrace, and of course we were in Fort St. John in the northeast, and both youth pastoring at the same time. And when Garth and I had graduated from high school, we had planned this week-long retreat that would be, it would consist of fishing and water skiing and hiking up in the Snow Lake area where they had come from. And the family still had, and I think they still do, I think Steve still has the family cabin, which is along Lake Wekusko. And so on one afternoon, June afternoon, we had left town and we were on our way, and we drove through Carmen and we went up to as far as Elm Creek, and then we turned eastward on Highway number 2 until we reached Fanny-Stell, and then we went north on what was Highway 248. We got to the Trans-Canada Highway at Eli, crossed the Trans-Canada, went north of Eli, went past Marquette, and we came to this bridge a few miles north of Marquette, and I was driving. And I was driving too fast for the corner that was ahead, and the road was wet, it was raining, and I lost control of the car, and I swerved one way, and then I swerved another way, and then came to a very abrupt stop against the guardrail of this bridge. Now, fortunately though, we did not go further down, and it was further down into the river or the creek or whatever it was below. And it was a harrowing experience, and I felt so bad because I had cracked up the Friesen's car, and it was more Lydia's car than anyone else's, I suppose, which was really great. And in that experience, it stuck with me. It's one of those things that I still remember, and it's one of those things too where you wished you could turn back time, right? You could do that. You wished you could, but then again, also like who really wants to be 18 again too? And I cannot remember when I had ever been on that road again until the boys were playing hockey with the Pembina Valley Twisters, and they had a game in Stonewall, and it just seemed that the shortest route to Stonewall from Morden was to go through Fanny-Stell and up through Eli, and there we were, and we crossed that same bridge that I had crossed some 30 years ago, and driving around that bend that led to the bridge, that previous history, funny, 30 years later, it still feels kind of fresh. But in this case, history didn't repeat itself because, well, I'm older and have more life experience, and I've learned a thing or two about driving, and plus I don't think I was driving anyway. I think Kara was driving, and I don't know why it is, but it was this experience that came to my mind when I was reading through our gospel reading, and I was reading it through it on Boxing Day. The story of Joseph and Mary and their baby boy Jesus picking up and taking flight out of their homeland to go eastward to Egypt. And it's a story that is rooted in evil, really. And yet, the astounding irony of it all is that with all of the evil that was floating around in the air, the story also has such deep roots of of redemption and salvation and reconciliation. And it's so clear that the enemy tried very hard to make that moment in history impossible, to prevent it from happening, desperately trying to prevent Jesus from carrying on life on planet Earth. And we know the story. There's this king, King Herod, and he is bent on killing Jesus, and he didn't know where he was or how to find him. He didn't even know whom his parents were, and Herod was crazy. And he finds these wise men, the Magi, knowing that they were familiar with these prophecies, these messianic prophecies, and Herod wanted to find them because he knew that those wise men knew the whereabouts of the Messiah's area of birth. And Herod, he fakes a heart of worship. He says, just tell me where the child is. I would very much like to visit him and worship him. And it's a remark that is riddled with evil, and it's full of deception, but obvious deception. As the wise men, they listen to this request, and they point Herod in that way. And Herod discovered that he'd been duped by the wise men, and he really goes through it. And he goes on this rampage of infanticide, or infanticide, however you want to say it, and ordering that all baby boys 2 years and younger be gathered up and slaughtered. And why didn't the wise men tell Herod where the Christ child was? Because they knew where he was, and they had traveled from so very far before they ran into Herod. But it was because they were suspicious. They were suspicious even before meeting face to face with Herod because of a dream that they had been given. It was God's way of telling them that Herod was up to no good. Be leery of him. Don't trust him. And even Joseph had a dream of God telling him to go eastward. Go east because Herod is up to no good. And look how hard the enemy, the evil one, works to bring the good of God down. But evil, it just can't prevail. And Joseph gathers his little family and they leave. And they head for Egypt where it is safer. Even to me that sounds ironic. There seems to be irony there too. Egypt was a land of security for Joseph. And here's a little more irony, is that it had been roughly around 1,000 years earlier when Egypt was a land of security for another man by the name of Joseph. And maybe you remember that story. Now, the story of Joseph from the book of Genesis, that Joseph, one of Jacob's 12 sons, had been sold into slavery by his 10 older brothers, and he was perhaps just a teenager around between 18 and 20 years of age. A bit more traumatic of an experience that would have been than running into a guardrail too. And I just find it interesting that 1,000 years later, Egypt is a place of refuge for our Joseph in Matthew 2. And here's a few other interesting little parallels to each of the Joseph's stories here. You have two egomaniacal rulers, and 1,000 years earlier it was Pharaoh. And in the first century it's King Herod. And both had a fear of Hebrew children, and both were untrustworthy, and both were capable of the unthinkable. And the observation that is clear of both of these two leaders whose reigns have this 1,000-year gap between them, that it was the most vulnerable who suffered the worst from the way they had wielded their power so irresponsibly. And the enemy ran amok within Pharaoh and Herod. And history repeated itself through those two rulers. And history has that tendency, doesn't it, to repeat itself over and over again. And either history is the worst of teachers, because it would seem that so many of history's students in the classroom of the world just don't seem to learn the lessons of history very well. You see, it just doesn't seem that you can pick up a history book or take a history class without discovering something deep and dark to whichever historical era that is being covered. And there are those who gain power, and abuse and hurt and pain seem to always fall on the vulnerable. And it would seem that whoever carries the biggest stick had the largest voice, and more often than not, they had the final say too. And it often benefited them. And honestly, I find this so very deflating. And I actually have to take breaks from watching the news from time to time because I nearly become depressed. And I feel that what I hear coming out of the mouths of politicians at times is just mere rhetoric. And it's not about accomplishing the better good of the people as much as it is to protect and preserve position and place within a party. So I turn off the TV or the radio and I turn to sports or music. And listen, I don't ever want to send political overtones in any message that I would ever put together or deliver. I just don't think that it's my place to belittle political leadership or even to try to convey a position that others take or hold. I don't think the pulpit is really that place. Maybe there is a place for it, but it's not me. I'm merely making an admission that I have a growing skepticism within me when it comes to leadership, be it at any level, national, provincial, local. And I have grown to become pessimistic. And I'm that way even when it comes to making major purchases now too. Having to be so careful so as to not be taken so it's not just leadership that gets me because I avoid coffee shops too. People trying to solve the problems of the world or offer their wisdom on what would solve the problems of their friends or acquaintances, the very people who often aren't even there to benefit from or glean from that wisdom because that wisdom is so much easier to share when the person being talked about isn't there. And don't even get me started on social media. I dumped Twitter and Instagram, came awful close to doing the same with Facebook too. For every person who remarks something nice, you will find another one who spews garbage. Wow, Tom, quite the message this morning. You've got problems. Oh, I know. I do, and I got more. And Tom, what does this have to do with the flight to Egypt? How did you get off on this rabbit trail of pessimism and disparagement? How does any of this have to do with the statement, history repeats itself? Well, I don't know if I was able to hook you or draw you into where I was wanting to go this morning through talking like that, but hopefully this makes sense. History will forever repeat itself because of what is in the heart of man. Pardon me, people kind. But Tom, that still sounds pretty pessimistic. But am I really wrong? There have been so many people within the world who are so good too, and who did do a lot of good things. There's people who accomplished some great things, and I believe it was because of the hand of God. You have the story of Oskar Schindler from World War II, and Mother Teresa in the House of the Dying in Calcutta, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, even a singer, U2's frontman, Bono, and even really at a local level too. And how about right from our very own little congregation? People who had been with us at one time, Ernie Cron, Art Craker, Susan Friesen, Clarence Mayer, Hugh, Helga, Midge, Elmer. These were good people who loved the Lord and who cared for people, the people, their families, and the people that were around them. And most of us were able to see the good in them firsthand. But I do think this too, that of all of the good people whom we can mention that we either knew directly or indirectly, or even just read about, they would have been faced with the same kind of tension that all of us feel. And it's a tension that sometimes overtakes us and sometimes we overcome. But the choice to live above board, taking the high ground, turning the other cheek, holding our tongue, refraining from giving into behaviors or reactions that do not reflect or bear resemblance to the image of our Creator, that choice can be an awfully hard choice to make. And often within our own lives, history repeats itself. We are prone to the same kinds of old temptations. We fall prey to the same kinds of things all too often. And for those who love to talk about others, that weakness will often be the very thing that will accompany them through life, unless that's the way it is with our things, our vices. Unless a decision is made, a decision to pray and plead with God for the grace to overcome. And replace that weakness with something from God that fills that unhealthy void with something divine. And ultimately, this is where I have to focus my attention. I cannot control too many things in this world. I can't control national affairs. I cannot control local affairs. I can't even control decisions within my own family members, be it immediate or extended. I have enough trouble controlling my own self anyway. But truthfully, that is where I have to begin, is within my very own heart, by getting back to the heart of worship. And what does that even mean? Whenever I drive past that bridge now, and I've been past that bridge a few times I was telling you about on Highway 248, I'm always fully aware of the history that I made on that bridge. And I drive slower regardless whether the road is wet and slippery or dry and clean. And after driving over that bridge, traveling either north or south, once I've crossed it, I tend to look back in the rear view mirror. And it's one last reminder before moving out of view of what could have been 30 years ago. See, I really do think that Garth and I could have died on that bridge on that summer afternoon. And that's not an exaggeration either. I was going 90 kilometers an hour into a bend where the cautionary speed limit was 50. Could have been really bad. Our Old Testament reading, Isaiah 63. Just going to read the first verse. I will recount the steadfast love of the Lord, the praises of the Lord, according to all that the Lord has granted us, and the great goodness of the house of Israel that he has granted them according to the abundance of his steadfast love. Now these words were spoken after an exile had come to an end for Israel, and the prophet is imploring his listeners to remember how God had stood with them through an awful time of crisis, captivity, and how God had also eventually saved them. Remembering was the heart of worship for Israel, and I think that remembering is the heart of worship for us too, recounting the steadfast love of the Lord. How God has preserved us, how he has protected us, and how he has blessed us. To take a look back in the rear view mirror of our lives. Because when you do, you're going to find how God has stood with you through your times of crisis, and you will see the blessings. You will see the fingerprints of God, and be given the assurance that God will stand with you today and tomorrow too. And so with that assurance, stand strong in your faith and listen. I was trying to be somewhat satirical, if that's the right context, but it's okay to watch the news, okay? Just be global-minded when you do, so you can pray. But the real work, the real concern for each of us is what is in here, is what is in our heart, and what it does to us. And are we at peace? Resting in the provision of God? Or are we restless because we're really tied to the tension that causes havoc within us and we're more grieved than at peace? Okay, crazy little short story. I've been really into short stories lately. Snow geese. I haven't seen a whole lot of snow geese around here in a few years, but began to start to see them again in the last couple. And I love seeing snow geese. Okay, this story is a little bit fictional, but you'll get the point. There is a flock of snow geese, and they're flying south for the winter. And they were flying in that beautiful V formation that they do, and who doesn't like seeing that? I love seeing that. One of the geese, Wally, looked down at this farmyard below, and he saw all these other tame geese and ducks waddling around, eating corn that had been strewn all over the ground. And Wally thought to himself, I'd like to get in on some of that. It's awfully tiring flying for days on end. And so with that thought, Wally descends down into that farmyard to take it in for a while. And he rationalized, I'm just going to be here for a little while. I'm going to catch up with the rest of the gang once they come back from the south when they're going north. That's what I'm going to do. And a few months had passed by, and Wally was right. Sure enough, here comes the flock, and they're coming back from the south, and they're flying overhead. And Wally saw them, and Wally is now tired of the farmyard. And all he would do was waddle around with the tame ducks and geese and eat corn. So when he saw his fellow snow geese, he tried to run and take flight. But the problem was that he gained a bit of weight from all the corn that he had been eating, and also just from living differently from how a snow goose should be living. And so he couldn't get airborne high enough, and he slams into the side of the barn. No problem, said Wally. I'll be ready to join them when they are going back south again. I'll be ready to join them then. But when that time had arrived, Wally couldn't even get airborne at all. And he just had not been disciplined enough to get himself back to the place where he was meant to be. so it is for the followers of Jesus too. It's not always easy living obediently, living the way of Jesus. It's not easy because it is hard. Life is hard, and we go through crises and through experiences where we react out of character at times, and we let our emotions take us to places where we simply can't get airborne for giving into the kind of reckless emotions that only lead to slamming into a barn wall. And the only way to become airborne again is to make the conscious decision to stay in formation, to stay true to Jesus. Asking ourselves when we feel that tension from whatever that is going on inside of us, now what would Jesus do here? And remember where you have seen the hand of God in the past. And become encouraged because he is still there. And he will still sustain you. And remember that he is the same God. And remembering will help bring you back to the heart of worship and when you can't see his hand in the given moment, in the specific moment, you can always do this. You can always, always trust. Because God will always, always be true. He's our hope. And on him we build. In conclusion, why don't we stand together and sing that anthemic hymn, My Hope Was Built on Nothing Less.